Greetings, everyone. This is Reverend Erica Whitaker. I'm bringing you a new podcast series with the BSK Flourish Studios. This podcast series is titled E3, Women in Ministry. E3 meaning equipping, empowering, and educating theological institutions and churches all around the world about the importance of women in ministry. We hope you enjoy this podcast. Well, everyone, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Reverend Dr. Laura Levens. She is a colleague, she is a friend, she's incredible. We are grateful that she's on this podcast about women in leadership roles. How can we equip, empower, and educate theological institutions and communities of faith on the importance of women? Dr. Levens.
Hello.
We are so grateful that you're here, and it's in person, which is really great.
I know. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes. You do so much, and you have done so much, and you're still so young. It's pretty remarkable.
Yes, convince everyone that I am very young.
Yes. Isn't that like the trope with like interviewing women? Let's talk about like their bodies and their age.
I was about to make an not very nice comment about like, would you like to talk about my body?
Oh my gosh. Yes. That totally is a stereotype that often happens in interviews, and I totally fell into that. No, please tell us, what is your role at the seminary? What do? You do so much more than just simply teach. Explain to us all the things.
Right. Well, so I am a faculty member at Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. I'm the associate professor of Christian mission. And the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky, first of all, it's because it's a smaller in size. One of the things that means is that I am an entire department, and I'm in charge of an entire department of education. So I think about what type of classes to develop for mission. However, because I was educated at Duke University Divinity School and their Doctorate of Theology program, I picked up all of these skills in practical theology and interdisciplinary work. And the school went, wow, Dr. Levens, would you like to develop a lot of interdisciplinary courses for us so like students can have a sense of how everything, I guess, is sewn together. All the different things that they learn are sewn together both as they are beginning and then as they end. So I also do the first and one of the last CAP type classes for the MDiv students. I also decided that it was time for me to have some leadership in this thing, some more, and now I am becoming the director of the Master of Arts program that is going to be brand new next year. So I'm doing a lot of the building in the background of this degree program, and I'm really into that, Erica, because part of me and my devotion to solid theological education and also solid feminism and support for women in the church and in the theological education is to take very seriously how anything is structured for someone to enter. So the fact that I get to sort of serve students by helping structure something that can be empowering for them and their ministry, but also see them as the person they are, not expect and demand them to be a student just like every, for example, male student in the 1990s, so that everybody gets to be different and it gets to be more careful and aware about everyone's differences and passions and drives as they come into education. So that's fun. It's like putting a puzzle together in the dark. I hope everyone enjoys the ride and the journey when it, unrolls and unfurls. I also, though, have been ordained since 2008. It's been about 15 years. I was ordained before I started doctoral work on purpose because there was a sense in my life that I both felt called to do doctoral work, but I also felt called to be ordained as a reminder of why I'm doing doctoral work. And some of that is kind of unrolled, not necessarily in being on a church staff or something, but being a person that, again, does the same sort of analysis and encouragement work in congregations and also with women who lead congregations. So I help direct the Kentucky Baptist Women in Ministry group, and we do different things as is needed for those women to feel equipped and empowered or just supported with where they are, and because they're already doing amazing things. But also I have found myself in a position over and over again of walking into a congregation, and because I've been invited to preach, I don't mean to preach in a way that causes people to think about what women can do, but it just happens. I preach and the congregation goes, wow, we could hear you. We didn't know that we could hear a woman's voice, for example. Wow, you've really given me something to think about. I'm going to have to think about that. Wow, this is possible. Are you interested in becoming pastor of this church? I've had like a couple of invites back like that, and I'm like, no, that's not really why I'm here, but I'm glad you think that that is more of a vision that you have and that that's more possible. So I do some of that, and then I also do a lot of different writing, and that sometimes that writing needs to be more public because what I have to say, that's the audience it's for. Some of it is more academic, and my academic research work, even though I am not always writing about women, my primary research is on gender theory and gender studies, and I do historical research on women all the time. So I am always thinking about what it used to be like to live like a woman and what it is like to live like a woman now. And that is just a piece of the puzzle that I'm always carrying into whatever endeavor I have. So, the women, they equip me.
No, I love that. And it sounds like they not only have equipped you by the research you've been doing on women in the past, but they've empowered you to really educate as well the men and women in your classrooms, in the congregations you preach at. I love that your passion around being kind of the bookend of a student's theological kind of journey in seminary is really nice. Like, you're creating this infrastructure, which is beautiful, but you're also creating a platform for them to launch off of too, like around a capstone program and things like that.
Yeah.
What has it been like as a professor, associate professor on faculty that's male dominated, like most theological institutions, in classrooms that most likely are male dominated too, depending on the setup? What has that been your experience?
So I would say that most of the time in my early years, I walked in feeling like the misfit in the room. And that isn't necessarily just where I work. I also was feeling like that as a doctoral student in many ways. We can sort of discuss how I also picked a doctoral program that would allow me to be interdisciplinary, which means I was not the typical, I'm going to follow this guild and I'm going to do exactly what people did for the last 300 years and put my little mark at the end of that. Anyway, so there's ways in which I'm just naturally sort of a misfit, but it also was a place, and really the only place in doctoral work, where I could ask the most questions about women and gender studies and history and all the things that I also cared about in theology, which was a theology of mission. What is God up to today? Mission. And so back to when I started classes, for a couple years, I just felt a lot like a misfit, or that someone was going to find out that I wasn't a man, or that there are ways that I can't reproduce what it is to be a male professor. And I always knew this, and I was just waiting for everyone of my students to be like, oh my God, we're going to stop listening to you now because
we just discovered you're a woman.
I know, we just discovered you're a woman. And thank God for the most part, the students never did, at least not for that reason, I don't think. But I think after a few years, I went, you know what? What if I just started doing the thing where you show what's behind the curtain and you show the infrastructure and you show the rationale, you show what it means to think like a teacher so that the students can follow or have their input, or at least see that they've been thought of and that I'm aware of them while I make up a lesson or pick a reading or whatever. That it's not just that I'm here to just keep the knowledge right. I'm actually here for them and here for their need for knowledge, and not just knowledge, their need to find out how to put that knowledge into practice where they are. And where they are is full of a lot of diversity and full of a lot of needs and full of a lot of need for critical thinking about the structures where they are too. So I was like, well,
So you're taking this relational approach and this contextual approach.
Yeah, and thinking about like, oh, would you like to see why this is done the way it's done? Sure, I'll show you. It's fine. And so I kind of eventually got this sort of comfortable professional identity where I could be a little bit of, I'm the professor that's kind of, here, I guess, to pull the curtain away from the men behind in the room, like a just straight up Wizard of Oz, just in case anyone was asking the students not to look at the men in the back room, I'm like, no, here they are. Or if it's not men in the back room, here's the structure of things, and this is why there's a limit here and a building over there and a piece of red tape over there.
How has that been received? You've been teaching for several years now.
Well, it makes some people nervous. It makes some people nervous, and because it requires a different type of trust in authority. Because what I'm really doing is presenting an alternative authority style to build a relational authority structure together. And so sometimes it does make people nervous because usually it's because it's something they've never seen before or been asked to do before. And it takes them outside of what they think is expected and what they think someone is going to talk to them about, for example. But for the most part, I think students really buy in to their own education and to the classroom in a different way that actually I think they respond really well to it. And because they eventually realize that what I am also trying to do is help them continue to think after they leave my classroom, that it's not necessarily that I want them to achieve a certain goal and just end the class, but that I'm trying to help them, take in and absorb whatever's going on in their context, and that I spend a lot of time recognizing the skills that they already have for doing that. And so things that they bring into the class, we can analyze and we can reflect on, and eventually they see that there has probably been this action wisdom, like they've already got some skills, they've already got some practice there, and I'm pointing it out and saying, look at you, look what you can do, that's great, and so or look what you've got going on, you've been afraid to look at that in your corner, but you know what, it's going to be okay. We'll all be here on the other side.
What an empowering approach, not just for the women in your space, but for the men too. And this is why I think it is so critical to have women, particularly from feminist or womanist perspectives, creating spaces that empower both men and women to find their own voices, to find their own calling in their own context, in their own relationships. And I think sometimes people, and maybe you've experienced this, when they'd be like, okay, well, a woman's teaching, so she's only going to cater to the women in the room. Well, how has that been? Is that always true?
Yeah, well, I think that what you just said at the end of that was a part of my early fear, because if I was only going to cater to the women in the room, or if I was only going to speak on something a woman did, I would only be able to talk for 2 weeks, and then 14 weeks there would just be a void where there would be nothing to say for the rest of the semester, and nothing I have authority to talk about for the rest of the semester. And obviously I was hired to talk all 16 weeks and teach for an entire semester, and then do it over and over again for a variety of classes, and be in charge of a whole department and build it from the ground up, So I think that is one of the ways that maybe now that I've done all that quite a bit, this is my 10th year of work here at Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. That's right. I think I have a little bit more capability as I've gone on to feel like, I can talk about structural issues, feminism, things that need to be done and thought about in the church. Especially, I have a lot of interest in what happens when a church is beginning to think about diversifying its leadership, both in how it leads itself and also in choosing another minister and things like that. I have a lot of interest in how that works because for me, as a person who studies women, I know how quickly things can be progressing rather well, and then all of a sudden, it's all gone. And not just gone as in people aren't helping women progress. They've forgotten that women ever progressed there. And so I guess I have a little bit of like a fear drive to like make sure that the Baptist churches and other churches and things aren't going to last another generation
exactly
after me.
And it's no coincidence that over the past year and a half, we've seen some of our Baptist brothers and sisters and congregations being forced to decide once again on women's roles in the church.
Yes.
It's also ironic, but also beautiful that Kentucky has the most CBF, Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, female pastors in the state who are senior pastors. I think we have 6, maybe 7 now.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's also really great that the Kentucky CBF churches, they didn't do that by themselves. They actually asked for help and resources and conversation and relationship with people like the Baptist Women in Ministry on a national level. They've been working with different types of partnerships and thinking through that together. So, it's not something that maybe it's because it's not something churches did in isolation, it will feel like it's something that can be maintained a little bit more.
And that's something that is historically important to remember, that churches have leaned on theological institutions for resources about help us navigate this theological dilemma or help us imagine a different way that we haven't always practiced. And I think you've been really pivotal in that. I mean, 10 years at a seminary, you're Kentucky born and bred. Even though you went to Duke, you returned home.
That's right. I did. Yes. Yes. It's, I don't know how much your listeners will know about the long past of women in theological education roles in this state of Kentucky. And it is a little bit of, I grew up watching what I then saw as a pattern in all of history, these progress of women in theological education and theological leadership, with theology and Molly Marshall, with social work and Diana Garland and other people. And then there was this large crisis and pushback where, it was on the line and everyone had to choose. And all of that was lost in the 1990s. So about I was alive, was like middle school during all that. And so, when I even was offered this job to come back to Kentucky, I kind of had to just say, look, I'm not even going to try to be the second coming of any theologian that has come before. That was because that to me, it was not necessarily going to help. Again, that still wasn't going to be me finding my own professional vocation and identity and all of I don't know that I would have wandered into the things I just told you about how I do the classroom or how I think about when I even write publicly or for academics. But I think I did know that was something that the state was going to have to work on and walk through all over again. And I knew it was going to take a long time. There's no, when you get something like a big pushback, and I think also now, I'm not trying to say, if people going through in those states, all this pushback from the Southern Baptist Convention, if all you do in the next 2 to 3 years is maintain your ground or not, felt like you've lost everything, you kind of won. It sounds really small of a win, but it really is, it really is something because I've seen it fall apart. But even though it fell apart in Kentucky, it didn't stay falling apart. I think we've really worked. And so to be a part of that has been wonderful. For you to be a part of that, Erica, has been equally great to be partners together. I think that's also just one of the ways that I feel like we've continued to be able to empower and equip women in this state is by Yeah, just by sticking it. Or when it's time to go, being like, we love you. We're so glad for what you contributed in this state while you were here.
Yeah. And 7 years ago, when Butyl Park Baptist here in Louisville called me to be their senior pastor, I was the only senior pastor female
You were.
in the Cooperative Baptist. Now, there's still a strong female pastor here in Louisville who's been around for 30 years. Sadly, they just got kicked out of the Southern Baptist. But again, I have great respect for her. Even though they're a different branch of Baptist. But when I first came here, there weren't other women in Baptist senior pastor. There were strong associate pastor women who now have taken on the mantle of senior pastors, which has been really profound. But when I first came here and they were like, have you met Dr. Laura Levens? I'm like, no, but she's got a doctor. What is she, like 80? I'm like, no, she's like my age.
I am 80. I was in middle school in the 90s as a 50-year-old.
As a 50-year-old. Yeah. But if you think about it, it's 25 years, a generation after all of that exploded in the 90s in Baptist life. And to see the return, to see the resurrection, the redemptive, the roles of women, really that have been kind of subdued and then rising again, it has been really remarkable to watch just over the span of 7 years. And then to be here, your entire life, to really see that shift again is encouraging.
Yeah, I think, I think it's been a really weird but helpful little pot to kind of try to figure out how to, I don't know if rising from the ashes, that feels very, like I don't know. That feels very heroic of me to say that, like, we've been rising from the ashes. And if so, it's because we've been following the Spirit. I'm very clear on that. And I actually think that being able to say, if whatever we do, we are following the Spirit and just enjoying the Spirit among us, I think has been part of the helpfulness of the past 7 to 10 years here in Kentucky. And I do think it's kind of been a time for me as a professor here to sort of learn, you know what, I do have this voice. My whole job isn't just to stand here and point at whatever someone else is doing wrong, because we've got a lot of conflict still happening in the state of Kentucky, like you just said, like with currently, this is just the latest round of, I'm so sorry for Great Baptist Church, but there's just like this latest round, but every so often it's been like, okay, this is my time to stand up and say, this really is not right, and this will harm students, and this will harm churches. It's so not right. And I think that's how my public writing career with Baptist News Global kind of got started. That's not the only type of thing I write for them every so often, but to stand up and say, it's time to talk and use the platform I have built for myself as a woman at the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky and as a faculty person, to stand up and say, no, we're not going to sit here and say that being upset about reparations is like just fine. Like, I can see the structural dominoes that are going to fall, and it's become extremely hard to have any sort of racial conversation if all of these seminary presidents from the Southern Baptist schools, agree that they're not going to talk about like race theory of any type. I'm like, that to me is also part of what I just told you about being able to build and show the infrastructure and have students buy in and all these things. Yes, it's gender theory, but it's also racial theory. Like, there's key demographics and key people who have worked so hard to think about how every way that our world is built around us, what is it softly pressuring us to do, and just to be aware, do I want to do that, or do I want to change? What's pressuring me to act in ways that are unhealthy, unloving, hateful, etc., hoarding, and rather than being generous, rather than all the fruits of the Spirit, for example. Yeah. And all right, I'm now on like a tear again, but I'm just saying, like, there's ways in which it's time to really use that platform and talk out. And sometimes it is about women in ministry. I have written about that. But sometimes it's on behalf of other people, and it's on behalf of the students who needs to know, and the state needs to know, that there are teachers who watch and who care, And that is their primary goal of driving what they do. And I'm sure also the same is true of ministers. Ministers are here to watch and to care. And that is a time to stand up and talk as well. I mean, there's other times when it's time to do different things in this state to build and grow.
And I believe that the reason why your voice is heard when you do find those pockets to speak out into is because you're doing the hard work. And you have been doing the hard work. And the hard work is the boring, not on social media, behind a desk in a library, doing the research, writing the hard materials, building the curriculum, creating contextual ministry opportunities for students in seminary, coming out of seminary. And then when it is time to say, okay, we need to step into the public square and make a statement here. We can do it ethically, we can do it with integrity, and we can do it from our own authentic voice. And that's what I've really enjoyed about working with BSK, is because BSK has been a theological institution that's been doing this work from the beginning. And they may not have always got the spotlight for reasons why, but it has prepared us for moments like this, particularly when it comes to how do we speak out for women in ministry, for women of color in ministry.
Yes, it's, I will say there are places that I've gone and places, to learn, and other places where, I have friends who are still also trying to do this work, but it is a learning environment where what matters most is like putting on a display, like a shopping display. And that's how we think about what's primary in our education. What do we put in the shop windows, for example? And that's just not always going to be, that makes working for women, working for racial justice, that makes it sound seasonal. And it does become seasonal because that's what happens in stores. You go through a cycle, people get tired, and you're like, okay, well, we'll replace it and we'll bring it back out when people are ready to hear about it from us again. And then the work stops in the background if it's not in the storefront. In that type of space. When I think about what we do at BSK, I mean, granted, there are different cycles. I think that continues to be just a part of human existence. I'm not upset that people go through cycles and need to pay attention to other things, because we wake up every day and something else has happened in our lives, or we wake up every day and realize that it's time to pick up a new skill or a new tool or a new position. But to realize that is just kind of more of a seasonal in terms of growing and changing, but what you sow and prep now may come and happen in the season it needs to come. That is kind of the culture that I think our school has tried to have. Like, what are the things, not because we want to be, I don't know. We probably do. We probably still want to be better than everyone else. We're scholars. That's just who we are.
A little competition is good.
At least we're just have a little competition. But I think we at least are, or at least when I do it, I know that okay, this preparation here, and then it's time to move and when it's needed.
Let's give a little example that I've learned, and I've only been at BSK for a couple of years now, but I know that before there was this big partnership between white and black institutions, Simmons College and BSK, that the faculty was already reworking the curriculum. One, reworking every curriculum, not just womanists, not just black preaching, not just all the curriculum was being reworked so that it uplifted diverse voices, people of color, women's voices, and so it wasn't just Eurocentric kind of white male 1990s curriculum. Explain that process, and then how have you seen the importance of doing that work come to fruition today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say that for the people I work with, and the other faculty members, the other staff members, they caught that vision somewhere else. And we all got to BSK and we're like, let's grow it here together, each in our own way. And so, so some of it started by thinking through, okay, let's just analyze how many readings do we have in a class, at least quantifiably on paper, are we adding voices? And then we sought to think about, well, you know what? People don't just speak and everybody speaks in the same exact rhetoric, the same exact logic. Some people tell stories, some people have poetry, some people, and I do think we had people that I work with that realized that there was value in the way people were trying to express their vision of the world, and it did not have to sound academic, but it was our academic research and study that helped us appreciate and see deeply inside all of those voices. So we had sort of a relationship understanding between like the more, your more formal academic, I've been published by a university press, and then also like The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene, and, the book reading club with novels and things like that. So it was involving both a wide variety of genres that also then helped us have a wide variety of voices in our syllabi, which then also led us to think, hey, those voices are calling for a response. After they tell us the way the world is, they're asking for us to respond in some way. And so then you have further change inside just a course or two, or you have a growth of a course. And then I do think that doing that in these incremental ways, then once, Simmons College, St. Stephen's, Dr. Cosby came and said, we'd like this larger partnership, it became imaginable, even though we knew it wasn't going to really change overnight. But we can work on it and work on it and work on it and work on it, do the same thing, prepare, grow, see what we can do, as our partnerships have developed in other places. And but I will say, I'm not the only person that had prior appreciation because someone told them that it was a good idea to study women's voices. Someone told them it was a good idea to not just listen to the Eurocentric white male voices or the 19th century or something. So whoever it was that told all of my faculty members to do that, I am really appreciative because they listened to you and I listened to my voice, like my people. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been trying to do. It's ongoing,
Well, and if I take away anything from this conversation with you is the importance on building upon the good work that has come before us. Mm-hmm. And to be faithful to that and to do that with integrity, to do that out of our own calling, and so that we can trust the future generations to build upon the good work that we have been doing.
Right. And that good work is going to not be perfect, but it's going to be good, right? We're going to be good. Perfection, again, that's for maybe those of us like me that just feel driven toward perfection. And then I turn around and there's a word missing or a comma's gone or I stumbled over a word and I've learned over the years just to roll with it.
I'm so glad people like you exist in the world because I'm it's just a comma, it's fine.
I'm no, I had such great plans for this and the comma's gone. No, I mean,
yeah.
But I do think that there are ways in which perfection can hamper us from getting a start. Mm-hmm. And the good can keep us going once we've started. And there are ways that if we don't say, hey, guess what? This is complicated, even as it's good, because we're human beings. We're always complicated, and we're always changing a little bit. And hindsight is real. We'll know better when it's too late. We've already done the action. If we can just kind of realize that as we think about what is good, and also realize that, another thing that I practice, and again, why I practice it with my students is I may have been at this work for a really long time and may have a very large vision and a large knowledge and large experience about what's going on. But I, at the end of the day, am a human, and someone else with their different vantage point and their different point of view will see something important for me to know. And, that also is a part of the work, that it is good, but it, done in isolation, it's not complete.
It's not complete.
It's not complete.
And it won't be complete with our generation, particularly our generation of women. But we get to build upon what came before us, and then we get to trust those to build on who come after us. And so I'm so grateful for you for equipping empowering and educating,
Yes.
particularly communities of faith and theological institutions like BSK. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Joining us on this podcast.
I appreciate this podcast. Thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you will take a moment to make a contribution so that we can continue to make excellent content like this podcast and so many others that we have planned. You can do so by going to bsk.edu and click on the Give button. Thank you so much for your support.